Hi, I'm Calvin Gaisford, an engineer on the watchOS team. In this code along session, we'll build a widget for the new Smart Stack on Apple Watch. We'll walk you through the whole process of building a widget using an app intent configuration. In the process, we'll be using the latest WidgetKit and SwiftUI updates. We'll use the Backyard Birds app for our code along. Backyard Birds is an app that lets you create and manage backyards that attract visiting birds. Our widget will show a backyard status. If a bird is visiting, it will show the bird and also include the backyard status. The widget will provide relevant dates to the Smart Stack so it can prioritize our widget when it's most relevant. If you want to follow along, you can download the sample code associated with this session and open the Backyard Birds Xcode project. We've already added a widget extension to the project which generated some files, including the Backyard Visitors widget file. We'll spend most of our time updating this file. Here's what we'll cover. First, we'll take a look at the widget structure which defines our widget. We'll also do a quick overview of the widget configuration intent. Then, we'll customize our timeline entry structure to hold data for our widget views, and we'll build out our timeline. Once our timeline has the data we need to enable previews, we'll build out our widget's views. After our views are built, we'll return to finish up the timeline. Finally, we'll look at the relevant intent manager and set intents for dates when our widget should be prioritized on the watchOS Smart Stack. Let's get started with the widget configuration by looking at the widget structure in our code. The widget structure is where a widget's configuration is defined. New in watchOS are app intent configurations. We'll be using an app intent configuration in our widget. The configuration intent, provider, and view were all stubbed out when we created the widget extension. We'll be looking at each one and implementing them for our Backyard Birds widget. This widget definition looks good, so let's move on and look at the widget configuration intent. Our widget is using an app intent configuration to allow it to do two things. First, our widget can provide a set of pre-configured widgets in the watchOS widget gallery. In the case of Backyard Birds, we'll provide a configuration for each yard in our app. Second, the widget configuration intent will be used to specify dates when our widget is most relevant. The Smart Stack will use this information to prioritize our widget in the Smart Stack. Let's look at our widget's configuration app intent. Each yard in Backyard Birds has a unique ID. I've already added a parameter named Backyard ID, so this can be used to create a set of widget intents, one for each yard identified by their Backyard ID. For the widgets we're building, that's the only parameter we need. To learn more about app intents and how to further use widget configuration intent, check out these sessions about app intents. We have our widget structure defined and a widget configuration intent that can hold a Backyard ID. Let's move on to our widget timeline and take a look at our timeline entry structure. The timeline entry structure will hold all of the data our widget views will need to render themselves for a particular date. Back in the Backyard Visitors widget file, locate the generated simple entry structure. The date and configuration properties were added when this file was generated. We need to define any additional properties our widget views will need. Our widget is going to show a backyard status with its name, food, and water status. If a bird is visiting, it's going to show the visiting bird and the bird's name. If there isn't a bird, it will show how many birds have visited the yard. To display information about the yard, we'll use a structure from the Backyard Birds app that holds all of the information about a backyard for a given point in time. This is important since the timeline entry may have a future date. Let's add the backyard property to our timeline entry. Now, let's add a few computed properties based on the backyard property we just added. First, let's add a bird property so the widget views can check if a bird is visiting and display it. Now, let's add two more properties that our views will use to show more information about the yard. Water duration and food duration will be used in the view to show how long the water and food will last. These are calculated from the date property in the timeline entry. A timeline entry also has a property named relevance that, if implemented, can tell the watchOS Smart Stack which timeline entries are most important. Let's add the relevance property to our timeline entry. Inside, let's check to see if the backyard has a visitor for the timeline entry's date. If there is a visiting bird, we'll return a timeline entry relevance structure. The timeline entry relevance structure takes two parameters, a score and a duration. The score is used to prioritize an entry against other entries in the same timeline. We'll set the score to 10 to rank an entry with a visitor higher than an entry without a visitor. This value is arbitrary and can have any range of values needed to rank entries in your timeline. The duration is used to tell the Smart Stack how long this relevance entry is valid. We've set the duration to last until the visitor's end date. If there isn't a visitor, let's return a relevance structure with a score of 0. This will tell the Smart Stack which timeline entries are most important. Depending on what else is happening at the time, our widget may be raised in priority on the watchOS Smart Stack. Our timeline entry looks great and has everything our widget views need to render properly. Let's move on and build out our timeline provider. There are 4 functions we need to complete for our timeline provider: placeholder, snapshot, timeline, and recommendations. The placeholder function is used when the widget displays for the first time and should return quickly. Since we updated our timeline entry to take a backyard, we need to supply one. Let's fix that by adding a random backyard from the app's data model. That's good. Let's move on. The snapshot function is used when a widget is in transient situations. This function should return quickly, so using sample data is fine as long as it doesn't take more than a few seconds to fetch. We can do that same thing we did in the placeholder function and pass a random yard. That looks good, but we could do better. The snapshot function is passed a configuration intent, which has the backyard ID property that we added earlier. All our data is local, so we can quickly look up and return the proper backyard rather than using a random backyard. Let's get the configured backyard from the backyard ID in the configuration. Now, let's check the backyard and see if we can get a visitor event from it. Let's return an entry configured with a visitor's date, and if we don't have a visitor, we'll return the configured yard with the current date. This will provide a better preview for the user since it will show the configured backyard. Before we dive into the timeline function, I want to turn on the Xcode Canvas preview. Let's fix the last simple entry and give it a backyard so we can see the preview. Now, let's turn on the canvas. New in Xcode is the ability to preview a widget timeline. The canvas is showing a preview of the rectangular widget, and at the bottom is a series of timeline entries that make up the widget's timeline. The Canvas preview is using the default view that was generated when we added the widget. Before we finish the timeline provider, let's go build out our view so we can better visualize our timelines as we build it. Locate the Backyard Birds widget entry view. Let's add an environment property for the widget family so we can build views specifically for each family. Let's replace the body with a switch statement so we can implement a view for each accessory widget family. Now, let's create a case for accessory rectangular with a view that takes an entry as a parameter. We'll implement this view below. The rectangular view is unique in that it will be the view of our widget shown in the watchOS Smart Stack. For our rectangular view, we'll follow a common pattern where we'll have an image on the left and 3 lines of text on the right. Let's go to the bottom of the file and we'll create the rectangular backyard view. The view uses the timeline entry we modified earlier to contain the backyard data. Before we continue, let's switch our Canvas view to the Smart Stack rectangular view. This will let us visualize the widget as we build it. Now, let's put an image and 3 lines of text in our view's H-stack. Look at the preview. That's not exactly it. Let's put the lines of text in their own V-stack. Okay, that's close. Let's put actual data into the view from the entry. First, we'll use a composed bird view from the Backyard Birds app that can display a bird. The bird is optional, so we need to unwrap it. Let's put the composed bird view and VStack inside an if-let check to see if there's a bird in the entry. If there isn't a bird, let's put an image of a fountain for the yard and text that shows no bird. We can now go through the timeline and see entries that show a bird with 3 lines of text and entries that show no bird. Let's fill out the details for the case where there is a bird first. For the first line, we'll show the bird's name, the second line, the backyard's name, and the third line we'll add information about the yard's food and water. For the case where there is no bird, let's show the yard name, the food and water information, and then the number of visitors to this yard. Let's see what our entries look like. That's great, but let's fix up the layout a bit. First, let's update the composed bird. Let's make the view scaled to fit and make it widget extendable so it will tint when used on a watch face that is tinted. On the bird's name, let's add the headline font, make it scale, and also make it widget extendable so it tints with the watch face. We'll also make the text take on the color of the bird's wing using a foreground style. Let's add the scale factor to both of our other views in case the names go long. Let's set the foreground style of the last line to secondary. Finally, let's make our stack leading aligned so our 3 text views are aligned. Our view looks pretty good. Let's apply all these same updates to the views in the else statement when there isn't a bird. Now our widget is looking better. Notice our widget has different spacing when showing a bird or a yard. Let's make those match by adding a frame to the bird view and the image view. We'll also add frames to the V-stack so they align properly. There's one more option we need to add to finish our widget for the watchOS Smart Stack. New in SwiftUI is the container background. Let's replace the container background with a gradient from the backyard. We'll set the container's background placement to be a widget. The container background is selectively used by the system, and here will only appear in the watchOS Smart Stack and not on the watch face. Now our view is ready for the watchOS Smart Stack. The view looks great, so let's go back to our timeline provider and finish building out the timeline. The timeline function is where a widget generates a collection of timeline entries that contain data to render the widget's view. This is the workhorse function of a widget. Right now, it's generating 5 entries with random backyard data. Let's replace that with a timeline full of bird visits. At the top of the function is an array of timeline entries. We'll use this to build our timeline. First, let's remove the generated timeline code. Now, let's get the configured yard using the backyard ID from the configuration app intent. The backyard structure has a property on it that contains all of the visitor events for that yard. Let's iterate on the visitor events for the retrieved yard. For each event, let's create a timeline entry that contains the start date of the visitor event and pass in the configured backyard. Our timeline preview updated. Let's see how it changed. Now, as we select our timeline entries, we see birds appearing. That's what we expected. However, every entry has a visitor. We need to add entries for when the birds leave, too. Let's create a second entry and use the visitor event's end date. We'll use the same backyard and append the entry to the entries array. Let's look at the timeline now. Okay, we have entries for when the birds visit and when they leave. Our widget timeline looks great, and this new timeline preview is amazing. It's going to make building widgets and timelines a lot easier. Finally, let's implement the timeline provider's recommendations function. Here we need to return an array of app intent recommendations, which will contain our widget configuration intent, which holds a backyard ID. Let's remove the default implementation. Let's create an array of recommendations to return. Next, we want to create a recommendation for each backyard in our app. So let's iterate through all of the backyards. For each backyard, we'll create a configuration app intent and set the backyard ID. And finally, let's create an app intent recommendation using the configuration intent and add it to our array. We'll use the backyard's name as a description. The recommendations function will now provide a list of widget configurations, one for each backyard, in the widget gallery when a person is selecting a backyard birds widget. Congratulations! You've now built a widget on watchOS that will surface as a watch face complication and the watchOS Smart Stack. Earlier, we talked a little bit about relevance when we implemented the relevance property on our timeline entry, but there is more we can do. Each yard and backyard birds app keeps track of the water and food available for birds. Our new widget is also going to show that information. We can provide the system a list of relevant intents during the time periods when we know the water or food is running low. Our widget will be prioritized during those times, letting people know their yards need attention. Back in our code, let's create a new function that will build relevant intents for any of our possible widgets and then update the relevant intent manager with those intents. We'll create a new function named Update Backyard Relevant Intents. In the function, we need an array of relevant intents. And we'll update the relevant intent manager with that array. To fill out the relevant intents array, we'll loop through all of the backyards in the app. Next, we'll create a configuration intent for the backyard and set the backyard ID to the current backyard. We'll create a relevant context based on dates. In this case, we'll use the backyard's future low food date and the future empty food date. Finally, we'll create a relevant intent. We'll use the configuration intent for our widget's kind, and the relevant date context we just created and append this to our array. Now, let's do the same thing for the backyard's low water and empty water dates. That looks good. Now the relevant intent manager has the date ranges when each possible configuration of our widget has a higher relevance. Let's go add this function into key components so the relevant intents are updated when appropriate. First, let's go back to the timeline function in the timeline provider. Let's call our function just before we return the timeline. This will keep the relevant intents up to date every time we update our widget timeline. Let's also go over to the Backyard Birds app. The Backyard Birds app has a detail view for each yard and provides a page where a person can refill the food and water. This is also an ideal place to update the relevant intents, since the food and water supply can change. In the Backyard Content tab, we'll add a task with our Update Backyard Relevant Intents function when the refill button is tapped. Since we know the food and water has just been updated, we should also make a call into WidgetKit and reload our widget's timeline. Now our relevant intents will be updated and our widget's timeline will reload when a person refills the water and food in a yard. We've now built a widget for the watchOS Smart Stack, and we've updated the relevant intent manager with date intents to prioritize our widget when it's most relevant. Thanks for following along. We look forward to seeing widgets you build for the watchOS Smart Stack. For more information about widgets, the Smart Stack, and app intents, check out these sessions. Be adventurous and never stop coding.